Hello and welcome to this next edition of the Value Exchange podcast. I'm Annabelle Lambert and I'm here with my regular co-host, Rob Pye. Say hello, Rob Pye.
The exciting bit. Hello, Annabelle.
Yeah. One
And
day
Ruby.
we'll nail that bit one day. We are delighted today to be joined by Ruby Mir, who we met via an event for an organisation called SkillsBuilder, who Ruby works for, but I'll let her talk about herself. The organisation is on a mission to promote more essential skills as being a common framework and language for people actually to develop and transition from education into work. Makes a lot of sense, but I am going to hand straight over to Ruby and say, Ruby, tell us about yourself and who you are, what you're about, where you're from, etc. Everything.
Great. Delighted to be joining the podcast today. It's my first ever podcast, so I'm very excited. And what great people and a great platform to be a part of. So thanks for having me. And it's always useful to start from the beginning so that you can understand where I've come from. So what that looks like is I was born and raised in West London. Was raised in a fairly normal household. My mum was a single parent mum, and there was 3 of us siblings being raised just near the Heathrow Airport. And I went to an all-girls school, Brentford School for Girls, and did really well within my education. Wasn't the most high-flying, but was above average, and potted through the subjects. And my high school didn't have a sixth form at the time, so I had to seriously think about sixth form or a college outside of what I was used to in my secondary education space. And there was something in me around that sort of between sort of 15 and 16 age that I just never felt like I was massively inspired by sitting in the classroom. But what I'm going to talk through today is sort of like 3 realization points that I had like throughout my lifetime so far. And one of them came about that age, around sort of 16, when I realized that everyone around me, I recognized the same opportunities weren't available to everyone. And so what I mean by that is I knew that I knew that I didn't specifically want to be in a classroom, but I was told by everyone around me that if I was going to be successful in life, I needed to have good qualifications. And there's something about that just didn't massively resonate with me. I wanted to have an impact in something, but I didn't know what that was. And so when I spoke to my careers advisor and I had my first college interview and I went home and I tried to speak to my mum, it all came down to one thing, which was, you have to have really good A levels and you have to go into university to have a degree. And that's the only way you're ever going to be successful. So I started college like everybody wanted me to and dropped out during the first year because there was just no motivation in me whatsoever. And so I then went to the local job centre, who introduced me to the idea of an apprenticeship. And that got me really excited. But it was all very new at that point. And my mum wasn't happy with it at all. She didn't see the value in learning and earning at the same time, and almost thought that I'd be a big disappointment in the family, being the eldest sibling, if I took this path. But I was adamant that it was for me. And so I joined a local authority within the education team. And that's where it all sparked for me, really, is realising the impact that I wanted to make was in the education space, and thinking about how we were talking to young people about careers, and then careers led on to helping people, break down barriers and their confidence, and then that led to skills, and sort of kind of takes me through to right where I am at the moment. So I can't sit here and say I had this massive ambition from the beginning to change the world around skills. But once I landed in education and at the council, I looked after all the work experience that happened in the borough. And that just started off by folding some letters and putting them into envelopes, and then moved on to finding the placements and measuring the impact of the placements. And I organised thousands and thousands of placements at the local council. And
So this is just to interrupt for people, I'm guessing, but if you are roughly 16 years old doing GCSEs, then councils would often bring together a short but beautiful like 1 week, 2 week work experience engagement with an employer, not paid, but just so that they can just walk around the workplace and get some feeling of what the real world
Yeah.
of work is like. Is that
Yeah.
what
Yeah,
you're talking
absolutely.
about
And
then?
it was part of the curriculum then. Every young person was given the opportunity and had to, as part of their curriculum, go out and do some work experience. And so it takes me back to my first realization point about recognizing that the same opportunities weren't available to everyone, because I realized quite early on that the young people that had good networks, had a working mum and dad at home, came from well established upbringings, they were able to find work experience placements really easily. But then there was always this group of young people that, one, weren't motivated at work experience, couldn't understand the value in it, didn't want to do it, just saw it as a bit of time outside of school. But actually, they're the ones that got the most out of it after we matched them to a placement. And it wasn't the realization that, oh my gosh, I want to be an engineer when I'm older because I've just spent 10 days in this engineering firm. It was more about them realizing like their wider potential. It was that they met people outside of their classroom environment, they had good conversations, and that spiraled into them having role models, even if it wasn't about, I want to do this job in 10 years time. But when we collected all the feedback and we'd do an analysis after different cohorts would go out, it was always the ones that didn't have very much motivation at the start of it, had no idea of what they wanted to do, and ended up, not having much say in where they were married up to, versus the ones that were going to the organizations of their mum and dad in the big corporate world. And so that just landed with me in a certain type of way. And I always went over and above to encourage employers to think outside the box of the type of young person that they would want to have in their business. And the challenges still remained in, we want someone to have really high quality skills. We want someone that's really academic in English and maths. And I really had to try to break down some of those barriers to help employers understand, well, actually, what are you suggesting are good skills that people need? And how about we don't look at it in a way that you're thinking about this young person will want to work for me in the future, but also giving that individual an insight into the big wide world, which they've never had a chance to experience before. And so we'd come up, I did this for about 6 years. And within that 6 years, I completed my apprenticeship at level 3. I then was offered to go to university, which was fully funded by the council, and complete a degree in education, where I learned around, all the history around Ofsted and, why the curriculum is taught, etc. And I never had any aspirations really to go to university, but it fit really well into what I was doing. So it just
And
felt
was
right.
that full-time
It was
education
part-time. It was
or
part-time.
part-time
So it took
still
4
with the
years.
council? So
Yeah,
with the
still working
yeah,
at the council. I went 3 evenings a week for 4 years. But it didn't feel that long because it just worked really well hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of, they weren't so much a competitor, but a very like-minded individual, because they weren't a council, they were a charity, approached me to see if I wanted to come and work for them, doing the same kind of stuff, but with a broader remit around careers. So not just work experience, but thinking about organising trips for groups of young people to go into a business, thinking about mentoring, thinking about running workshops in schools. So having a lot more engagement with the young people. And that was a charity called Spark. And I had a huge amount of learning there, and started off as sort of a head of programs. And then during my 9 years there, ended up leaving as the chief exec of the charity. And one really standout point for me during my time at Spark was that I had an incredible role model, who was the previous chief exec at the organisation. And at a point where I never thought I could reach that level, he empowered me and mentored me in the most incredible way that, you know, lifted me up and took me outside of my comfort zone and gave me the confidence that I needed. And he just gave me the space to fail. And I did fail along the way. I did get things wrong. And I did have a terrible audit. And I did have a really bad looking budget forecast. But he gave me the space to make the mistakes and then mentored me through the process. And so we got to the end of the 9 years and I realized, okay, I've taken the charity as far as I think I can go. And the charity was West London based, which meant a lot to me because it was where I was born and raised. And I had a lot of contacts in the area. My school was one of the schools we were working with. It felt really good, but I wanted to have more of a nationwide experience. And I wanted to have more of a kind of national exposure to understand like the different challenges across the country. And so without having a job prepared or a job that I was going on to, I decided that I was going to hand in my notice January, when we came back off the Christmas break, January the 2nd, 2020. And I was going to work I had a sort of a 4-month notice period. I was going to work my 4-month notice period and look for a job at the same time. And if it meant that I had to use a bit of savings because I needed a buffer couple of months in between, that was absolutely fine. Had all the right conversations, had a plan, had it all written down. I was well on my way. So went into the office, sent my chairman of the charity my resignation letter. And then that same evening when I was at home, felt rather off and found out I was pregnant. And so what that meant was I had to go back into the workplace and take the resignation back, because actually my thinking was that I'd stay on at the charity until I was ready to go and have baby, and then I wouldn't return after that. And that was a decision I had made at the time. And that was all well received, and they said that was absolutely fine. So continued on. COVID then hit in March 2020. And that was when I had my second sort of realization point that I reflect on often, which was I then was introduced to coaching. And I had never realized the power of coaching. And so I trained as a coach on a course for about 6 weeks. And it was just before we went into lockdown. So it was timed really, really well. But it was just one of those wow moments where I realized if everyone had access to the power to be able to coach and help people reach their full potential without giving them the answers, you know, what an amazing world we would live in. But what I realized is, you know, that may not be the case, but I can now shine a light and have an impact by using this new skill set and putting it into the programs I create. And off the back of that, I set up my own mentoring program for young women from disadvantaged backgrounds to be mentored by senior business women across West London. And the program's still running to date and has incredible impact. And it wasn't your typical mentoring model where it's all meant to come from the mentee. There was quite a bit of structure around it without being too prescriptive. But I knew what I wanted the programs to achieve, and I knew to find really good mentors, they needed a lot of training. And then I used my coaching model that I had just learned myself and embed that into this mentoring program. And the good thing about working with senior business women is they have it sort of ingrained in them already. It's just giving them the tools and the slides and a little bit of structure to get the best out of that young person. And so that all happened. We then started all working remotely. I was still working at the charity. We plowed through until then I went on maternity leave in the October 2020, and I had been training the latest CEO at Spark in the lead up to that. Had baby the following month, which was great. Was great in that because I wanted a child, not great that it all happened during COVID time, because I found that all rather stressful. But then came my next realization. So 9 months of having baby, that all, came with its challenges, as you can imagine. And then I went through this huge identity crisis. I didn't know, now that I was back in the big wide world trying to look for a role, my brain was a little foggy from just having baby. I definitely lost some confidence. And I went out to all my network and jobs and made up to about 40 applications. And it took me about 18 months to secure a role. And that just really did knock me sideways. And that third realization that I had was, I talked about skills a lot and I talked about confidence a lot, but actually when you're at your lowest point, how can you demonstrate these skills? And it's all well and good when everything's going well for you and you've got access to all these opportunities and you're surrounded by wonderful people, but it's really hard to be on the other side when you have to demonstrate all of these skills when you're at your lowest, borderline depressed, I'd say. And it just put me into the eyes of some of the people that I was always trying to encourage, but hadn't really appreciated what they might be going through. And so it was great to try and give them the answers and be like, well, the answer to everything is to get some really good work experience, get a really good network, and you'll be sorted. It just helped me understand the emotional side of things that comes with, I call it trauma, because I found the whole kind of COVID period with having a baby quite traumatic. When you're dealing with sort of trauma. But then I also realized that trying to articulate my skills to a whole range of people wasn't serving me well either. Trying to recreate a different version of myself for every application, for every interview, to talk about the skills that they needed me to have for that job that I knew wholeheartedly I had, but couldn't get across to anybody in the way they wanted me to talk about it. And that was when I knew that there was a huge gap for having structure and creating transparency within recruitment processes. And so on my journey of looking for a role, I had identified 5 or 6 organizations that I did want to work for that were very much aligned to my passions around skills, careers, lifelong learning, those types of things. And actually, SkillsBuilder was one of those organizations, but they didn't have any active roles. And actually, they didn't have any active roles for a really long time. So I switched my method to trying to find out where SkillsBuilder might be at an event or at some sort of networking conference, something where I could connect with them personally. And I found that they were having their annual anniversary event, and that was advertised on Eventbrite. So I connected with the founder on LinkedIn, asked if we could have a conversation, asked if I could be the guest at their event. And that's where where the story began with my time at SkillsBuilder. And actually, in that conversation, I might have only had about 4 minutes kind of contact time with Tom at the time. And it was just to shake his hand, say hello, I'm Ruby, and I'd love to work for your organization. But I knew that they still didn't have any roles at that point. And then it was about a month later, I got a phone call to say something's come up, and would you be interested? And it was advertised at more of a junior role than I would have liked. But because my confidence had been so shaken at this point, I felt like it would be a good transition back into the workplace. And did I need to go into someone thinking massively strategically and be rewriting everything and doing everything in a different way? Actually, it would have been nice to sort of follow some baby steps and actually work on myself rather than having to re-energize everything that was going on. And so that's what happened. And then the ambition once I started was that if everything was to go well, then I would receive a promotion the following year, which I did. And I now head up the development team, where I can take all the things that I feel really strongly about, sort of skills, lifelong learning, into employers to get them to think outside the box, and at the same time work with a great group of people that also are very passionate about the same stuff. And the missing piece that was always there for me is like, what is the structure? How do we define skills? My definition of skills is going to be very different to yours, Annabelle, might be different to yours, Rob. And so how can there be a common language somewhere so that we can better set up young people for success, rather than having to work out along the way, like, what are they good at? Why not have something that tells them what their strengths and weaknesses are, and employers talk the same language so that they can overcome some of those barriers that exist within recruitment. And yeah, it's working brilliantly, and I love my time at SkillsBuilder, but I still really feel strongly about social value, social mobility. I speak to lots of employers, I get their insights of where they're at, and it's working really well. So that's
Wow.
me.
Oh, wow. So who's going to go first? Annabelle, go on.
Yeah, no, I'm really,
Wow.
breathe and breathe. I'm quite moved by the bit about not all of it, of course, but in particular, I feel something I've always strived for and encouraged is the bit where you talked about how you there were organisations who you wanted to work for. There were things that you wanted to do. There were things that mattered to you, and yes, of course, it comes from experience that you'd built up. But obviously, it means something to you. It's helping people in their career and with their skills and their education and those sorts of things. And I feel that. My experience, my personal experience, is that I've always been on a track. When I was like 15, 16, I would write to everybody and anybody and go, look, I really want to work with you. And there was no barrier. Didn't feel any barrier. They could write back and say no, they could ignore me, but it didn't stop me doing it. It didn't, I wasn't waiting for the job role to come in the list. So your story there about SkillsBuilder is like somebody I'm really interested with, and taking the time and being bothered to just do something which I think is still very alternative, which is like turn up and say hello and be there. And so when we work with young leaders, so 65 young people, what is it you want to do? Where do you want to go? Just as an encouragement and a watching people's confidence raise, in some cases lots, in some just a bit, but just that whole like, well, when you say to them, well, who do you want to work for? It's like that's a completely different question to what role do you want to fulfill. Why do you want to work for them, and what are they going to bring you, and and why don't you just contact them and tell them this is how you feel. I'm sort of having a lot of empathy, I guess, with your story there, as to, but I don't know how. I guess my question is, I feel that's still quite an alternative route. I don't think everybody approaches the recruitment market in that way. I feel it's very broken, the recruitment market. What do you think in you? How do you feel about that? I guess is my question. Do you think that's quite normal?
I don't think I wouldn't say it's normal, but what I'd say is like there's a lot more access now with LinkedIn and all the social media channels that organizations have. So it's like to get in contact with people is a lot easier. So I don't think you always need to fall back on having that face-to-face time. It was just, I got to a point where I had tried everything. I had tried all the LinkedIn. I had thought of creative ways to put myself forward, but no one was seeing me for me. No one was seeing me as Ruby that has this experience that, and I wasn't trying to drastically change what I was doing. I wasn't trying to go from the charity world to the corporate world or anything really significant. So I guess I came to that after I think I had my 41st interview, and it was just knockback after knockback, and I'm knockback, and I'm sitting there thinking, okay, well, it may be just me. It may be me that's not the right person, but what is it that I'm missing? And then there was no feedback. There was no time to say, well, actually, okay, X person was able to demonstrate this in a different way to how you did it. So I'm just like on this vicious cycle. So would I encourage a young, a young person or young adult to go and approach someone? I do think it is powerful, but I think you can achieve the same result by connecting with someone on social media, and people want to help. I just think it was a really difficult time for me just coming out of COVID. There were actually loads of jobs. That wasn't the issue. I just think there was a lot of people on the market that had been made redundant, people of all levels, all experience. And it was just a bit of a mishmash, really, at that time.
It's a wild world. It still is.
It was, yeah.
So I've got about a million questions, but firstly, I just want to thank you for sharing the story, which I think was beautiful, because there are so many bits in it, not just the three key points or epiphanies. But we can take a segment out, right? From the all girls school, West London. By the way, my first job was West London, Hounslow. Honeywell Bull. That was, but I was a graduate. But so I think we've got the system is broken. Age 16 for people who like where you were when you were 16, where it wasn't obvious that next step. In so many ways, that's a difficult age, because you, in the eyes of a system that is taking you from a child to an adult, in the eyes of the law, if you're in that, if you're 16, you're a kid. If you're 18, you're an adult. And there's this sort of tweeny bit in between it, where the whole system sort of it kind of expects you to follow that path that your mum wanted you to follow. But it's because that's how, what you got to get that, you got to get that, got to get that. And of course, apprenticeships and the apprenticeship levy and the infrastructure around that is still a relatively new phenomenon, and it's not. And young people at that age will kind of be going through an identity crisis anyway, because their body's changing, their life's changing, their worldview's changing. Everything is changing, and yet, if you step almost a millimeter off of a track where there's confidence, there's love, there's support, it's really quite easy to nosedive and find. I sort of my sister's journeys. From that point, I'm youngest baby boy. I have two much older sisters, if you're watching, Jackie and Maria, and the young brother. But they had that very different pathway to me when we were 16. One of my sisters had a baby very young, and she had a career and a degree much later in life. I won't tell you how young she was, but it was very young. And then the other one, her degree again was later in life, and had a squiggly pathway. So for anyone who has that question mark, whether it's self-confidence, whether it's sort of like whatever the circumstances, well, wouldn't it be nice to imagine living in a world where you don't feel like the odd one out, and you're going to disappoint everybody, particularly your parents, but the world can love you, wrap around you, give you a pathway that has just as much love as if you were doing that high flying Oxbridge degree or whatever, and that I mean that's a lot of the rationale behind the Commons Fund, but I think anybody who's watching this and watching where you are now, how you've come through that first question mark of I don't know, in an honest way, could just draw so much inspiration. And we did something not publicly but internally in Ethos for this group of 65 young people, where we got Ruby's story, if you like, for some of these vice presidents in Google to come in and say, well, how on earth did you end up? And it's like, well, do you know, it was squiggly, it was random, it was, and it wasn't, you know, we shouldn't think that you have to just be this A star all the way in Oxbridge and that. It's not all about that. It's just about understanding that, you know, we're all going to get depressed. We're all going to have confidence problem moments, and you know, we just need to find the positivity to choose what's right for you. Now, so then you had another lived experience bit of having had this moment. You then got to be inside a council to help people who you know, in that moment. Sorry.
And I genuinely believe it was just meeting the right person at the right time. And so if, you know, we know that the routes from education, you know, from secondary school into like what you're going to do next, whether you go into an apprenticeship, college, sixth form, A levels, we know it's slightly fractured. But what I think we can do is just have like good access points of information. And I think that's what we do have. We're better at it now. We've come a long way to when I first did that when I was 16, and there wasn't anything you could look up about apprenticeships. It was just kind of seen as the thing people do if they're not very smart and they don't want to go on to college or university. It's a thing to kind of just do in the middle so you don't become unemployed and go on benefits. But it's, you know, it's so much more than that. And I hear from businesses all the time now. You know, I just saw the launch of like Capgemini's apprenticeship program and BT and all these amazing organizations that are saying, you know, come and train to be an engineer with us. And, you know, they're just really set up for success from a really young age. And so what I think this comes back to me from too is I think careers advisors can only take you so far in schools. And I think, you know, there is a big agenda there to ensure people are hitting the grades they need so that they can be well received in, you know, the various tables, etc. And I think, you know, the job centres are overworked, overwhelmed. But there's lots of like training providers in the middle now that do incredible work. It's just whether they're being led to the right people. And I wish that was a little bit more clearer for a young person that has no idea, doesn't really have the advice from home, knows they don't want to be in a classroom. It's like, how can we guide them better so that they don't feel like they are, you know, they are alone? And sometimes that comes from work experience, right? They might go somewhere and think, yeah, I'd be massively inspired by this. I'm going to loop back round 3 years later. And a lot of organizations say you go on the fast track if you've done work experience with us. You then go on to the fast track if you want to do an apprenticeship with us later on. So I do think it's a lot better. But then that bit that I talked about how do we stay positive when things are, you know, how do we stay positive when things are not in a great place? And that's why I really admire the SkillsBuilder framework too, because again, what does it mean to everyone to stay positive? It's very subjective. And actually where the framework breaks down each skill to be able to say, okay, like, where am I currently at? Where am I at? Am I more in the intermediate phase? Am I demonstrating the early stages of staying positive, or I'm at the mastery level? And the idea is that you're moving all the time. You know, and that's
I'm
really
going to come back to that, but I want to do the having a baby first. But so just other bit on the 16 and that transition. Whereas, you know, I think that, yes, undoubtedly we're doing so much more in terms of signposting and opportunities and, you know, apprenticeships, you know, T-skills, you know, possible pathways. We're not catching everybody though, and I worry about the people that are still left behind by a system. Now that can even be somebody from a Russell Group university with a master's degree. You know, this is not about whether you've got any education or you've been to prison or you've been dealing drugs or whatever. That, you know, there will always be people that the system has left behind, and I think that it's the focus not on the mainstream that it's working well, you know, working better and better, but it's on the people that we're leaving behind, whether that is because of a cost of living crisis in that family or a mistake that the young person's made or or whatever. So I just want to say we should never never rest until we're looking after everybody. Is kind of my emotional just a little bit. But then right, let's get back to pregnancy, because I think that if you think of your life, and honestly, all of us, we're all going to have those moments where life's turned upside down for some, and in your case, a beautiful, reason of actually, becoming a parent, and it's a really monumental shift in your perspective and your context, and it can, of course, often does, and lead to moments of either self-confidence drop, and that's almost like a 16-year-old point as well, again, isn't it? It's kind of like I'm faced with redefining, and we did some projects with people back to work after parenting for, employed a group of people where they were in that moment as well. And again, it was very, I'm good at joining the dots. I saw it as a similar cohort, a similar, how do we wrap our arms around people and really focus on that self-confidence bit. So do you see that we should be doing more to support people who have been parents returning into the workforce? Is that, I know, again, we're doing much better. There's lots of stuff out there, and we see people focusing exclusively on that flexible work, part-time, working from homes. There's so much to talk about, but for every person who has lost confidence, and again, we've all got lots of stories about people we know and ourselves or whatever, that confidence bit, should we be doing, what could we do more of? What
that's a really interesting point. And I guess it comes back to that power of coaching as well. I think you have to have some really inspirational people that are line managing those individuals to not have them come back into the whirlwind of work. And I know we have things like keeping in touch days. Don't think that they're very useful. I think they're a nice thing to have, but do I think it helps that person when they're actually back in their jobs full-time or part-time, whatever it may look like? Probably not. And I always admire organizations' culture when they give individuals, it might not be forever, it might only be for the initial 6 weeks, like, this is your time, do what you think is the right thing to do. I'm not going to give you endless lists of targets and a to-do list. You manage your time, and let's have a really solid professional development plan of like what you need from us, and then you're going to get the best out of that person. You really are. And I think
I could just imagine a keeping in touch day with a 3-month-old baby and some boiling kettles and ironing and nappies and hello, how are you?
An analysis of the numbers for the year, like that is just, I couldn't think of anything worse, but I think coaching transformed my life in so many ways, in my personal life, in my working life, to be able to say the right things at the right time. And an individual can unfold into so many different ways, but giving people the space to talk and be heard. And I know that's not always practical in the workplace, but I think it's a worthwhile 6-week investment to make with returning parents, because you just don't know what their time off. Everyone, it's like when people assume everyone at the airport is happy because they're going on holiday. Like that's just not the case. And it's the same with, parents coming back to work. You've probably had some really nice baby cuddles, but you've also are running on, complete lack of sleep, re-identifying yourself. Who knows what trauma came along with it?
Feeling
relationship
guilty
issues.
about the child.
All of those.
Okay, we don't need to build that too much.
But I would love to. It's not my bag, but I think I've identified even in different workplaces where like more can be done, and I think you just need to have the champions internally to say, I'm willing to mentor this person as they come back into the workplace, etc.
I think, yeah, and I think, I mean, we've got loads of stories, you know, because I'm a massive advocate for what I call real flexibility, which is sort of allowing life. And life is very different once you have a child, and you're not the same person, and you have different commitments. And so the role you were doing, you can come back and do it, but people need to understand that you are different, and what's required of you is different. And so therefore you will not be that person that you were before, because you are different now. So just making that space for people is really important, I think, for people to understand that if you're working 80 hours shift in a corporate bank, you know, that isn't the life of a parent, you know, of somebody. It really isn't. There might be people who deny that, but that's their choice. But really, you know, expecting people to just pick up a lifestyle like that again is just not. And that's not wanting to undermine, you know, opportunities, because I think that's a ridiculous lifestyle anyway. That's personal, that's my opinion. Living 80 hours a week doing corporate banking is not, you know, it's not healthy for anybody, don't care what they say. So, you know, it's how do you deal with that, create that space that you're talking about, but on a permanent basis as well. I think it's longer because life changes, you know, children are ill, they need to go to school, they need, you know,
you're
if you're
totally
going
right.
to parent, you're going to parent, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly. And for employers to be more realistic, like as you're saying, they're not going to be the same, but they're very different, and actually their 100% can't be compared to what their 100% was before they left the organization to go and have a baby, but it's still their 100% at that moment in time. So
Wow. So we must talk about SkillsBuilder.
Yes,
I'm now someone that knows
Consciously.
nothing about SkillsBuilder. You know, what's that all about? Let's do the 101. You know, I've got my GCSEs. You know, I'm pretty bright. I can do maths. Or I can't. But what's it all about?
Yeah, I love that. How do I best describe SkillsBuilder? So it's evolved since 2008, and the framework comprises of the eight essential skills that everybody needs, no matter what job or where they're at in terms of their journey in their life. And what we mean by that is the framework is suitable to primary school level age young people, right up to to individuals that sit at the mastery levels of skills in the workplace. And so the skills don't change, but where you're at in terms of the skill very much depends on where you're at in life. And these 8 essential skills, which for me is the gold dust, because it really just puts the right language and creates a robust framework so that we take away all the jargon. So we don't have to think about what does it mean to have good leadership skills? What does it mean to have good listening skills? It's there in black and white. And people often ask, are these still the relevant skills? 15 years on, are these still the skills people need? And our founder and the whole team very much agree that they are. And they're the skills that people need, that machines can't take over. And so some people, you know, I heard them being called human skills a couple of weeks back. These are the skills that you need to be a well-rounded individual, and they sit alongside the technical skills you need for a specific industry. So we're not saying that the be-all and the end-all, and you only need these skills, but they need to be being developed alongside the technical skills that you need for work.
Okay, so I feel that at this point we should say skillsbuilder.org is the site you need to go to if you want to find out more about it. And let's just demystify it by going, I've got it on my screen, over the 8. So listening, obvious, listening. Speaking, yep. Don't need to unpick that. Problem solving. Do you want to just a minute on that?
Yeah, sure. So this skill focuses on how to solve problems, recognizing what part of the problem you can contribute to, but also thinking about how you assess situations. So for anyone that's able to access the SkillsBuilder framework from our website, you'll see that under each one of these skills, there's 16 steps to reach the mastery level of this skill. And the
Steps to
first
heaven.
few, yes, the first set of steps are all about that you can follow instructions, you can find the information you need yourself. So people in their early careers, people perhaps in a graduate program or an apprenticeship program, would be working towards kind of the getting started steps. And then as people go into sort of more experienced roles, the type of steps you would see under problem solving include: I explore complex problems by building my understanding through research. And then you can click further into that step to understand, what does that even mean? And can I actually even do it? Or is it something I do a bit of, but I should be doing more of? And then it takes you to like the most highest level of this skill includes: I implement strategic plans to solve complex problems and refine those plans over time.
Okay, so listening, speaking, problem solving, creativity. Everything I've read in the last 2 decades says that, you know, the world is about a future of creative people. So this is a really, really cool one, creativity. I don't know if you want to say anything about that, but, you know, just put a marker that creativity, that's really where it's at.
So our definition of creativity is the use of imagination and the generation of new ideas. That's our definition of creation, and it complements problem solving.
Cool.
I think that's all I need to say about that one.
Yeah,
All
I
right,
think
so-
I
and
think
then-
what
Oh,
no,
yeah,
I just
sorry.
I feel where people get caught up with creativity, where the fallacy about creativity is that it sort of sits often with arts and artistic, and yes, absolutely, but I feel it sits everywhere. And so how you just described it
100%.
makes me feel comfortable, because I'm like, yes, that's exactly what it is.
And
Anyway.
so one of the steps in this one, step number 9, is I develop ideas by asking myself questions. We pretty much all do that from time to time. Another step which resonates is I support others to innovate by sharing a range of tools. Again, something that people are probably often doing but don't relate back to that particular skill set.
Yep, and it's something as babies we're all innately good at, and then we go through education, and then maybe become like, "No, that's
We're all rushed and
is that the
speak.
right answer to the interview question?" It's like there's no right answers, you know. So staying positive, I feel the theme of this webinar could be staying positive. You know, it's like it's so many stories on that. I don't know. Do you want to say anything on staying positive, or have we
I was
said
just
it
going to
all?
say, I'd say that if there was one skill that I've had to demonstrate over kind of my lifetime up until now, this is the one that resonates the most. And our definition of staying positive is the ability to use tactics and strategies to overcome setbacks and achieve goals. And I think we can all agree that there's setbacks all around us all the time. And so sometimes we have to use the most mastery levels of staying positive, and sometimes it's just the early ones. And you know, the earlier stages include very simple things. I can tell when I feel positive or negative. I can keep trying when something goes wrong, and they're just the first 2 steps. And so it doesn't matter which step you're closest aligned to. It's that you're just practicing and demonstrating the skill and taking a moment to reflect on, actually, you know, how often do I do this? Am I doing this well? Is there anyone I can learn from? And the whole idea of the steps is understanding, okay, well, I've been hovering up to step level 6 for a really long time. Who's going to help me get to step 7, step 8, step 9? And that is where we have these conversations with employers to say, how are you stretching people? How are you giving them the right staff development that's bespoke to them, rather than putting on random courses that actually they think at the time is good, but how much does it stick with them?
Yeah, I read some stuff yesterday where it was about the meaning crisis, and a survey done 3 years ago saying 80% of the people they surveyed thought their life was meaningless. I mean, it's quite it's quite a
That's quite a
bad
lot.
prognosis, really. That's quite a lot. So I'm going to unpick these next two tiny bit more. So aiming high. Do you want to give us some clues on what you don't just mean being a skydiver or
Aim high,
shooting
hit high.
for everybody being a chief executive, I'm assuming.
So this one's all about the ability to set clear, tangible goals. So at the most advanced level, individuals are able to develop long-term strategies, and at the most earliest levels, it's around I know what I'm doing works well for me. I work with care and attention to detail. I work with pride, and I work with a positive approach to new challenges. And I'd say aiming high fits in as a really strong skill when you enter. I'd say aiming high and listening are probably two skills that are really high up on the agenda for coaching, because the whole idea of a coach is to help others realize their goals and help build a robust route to achieving them. And so this one lands really well with me.
Yeah, and just you know, I'm hoping that you will agree with this. You're not assuming in your aiming high that everyone needs to be a Premier League footballer, and not everybody needs to aim high. And in the context of being a billionaire, or Elon Musk, or Zuckerberg, so
Absolutely.
it
Yeah.
could be I want to be a gardener. I want to garden my
Yep.
garden. That is, I'm going to have a 4, 5, 6, 24-year plan about gardening, and that is just unbelievably, high goal in terms of how I'm planning. And is that the kind of thing that you mean by that? So
Absolutely.
yeah, it's not
Absolutely.
hierarchically high. It's not
And I think
economically high. It's like it's high for you. It's high
it's
for
whatever's important. It's whatever's important to you. And if that means you want to be a better cook, or you want to get more into gardening, and I can tell you that the framework is all about whatever's important to you and setting goals at the time, because the most highest step um, is all around I develop long-term strategies that use regular milestones to keep everything on track. And nowhere
yeah.
does it say anything there about
Elon
hitting
Musk
that
or
six
billionaire.
six
And
figure
I
salary.
raised that because
Yeah.
the work that we've done in the last 15 years, in the context of TikTok and YouTube and social media, particularly for young people, that aiming high, it's like, okay, Premier League, or, YouTube influencer of 6 million followers or something. So it's like, this is not what we're talking about. Then we need to just sort of kind of like confront some of those hidden assumptions when we go aim high. No, it's
Yeah.
just what Ruby said.
And if I was coaching someone through, some sort of career plan, I would say, like, great, if that's what happens along the way, then brilliant. But actually, let's, always come back to like sort of our values, what motivates us. And actually, if you end up on that journey, then that's absolutely fine. We're not saying you shouldn't be
No.
driven by the salary or the perks or the benefits, but it's got to mean something to you. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the questions I'll often ask someone is, what happens if you don't get there? What will that mean to you? And often, well, nothing. Doesn't If I don't get there, then I don't get there, and then that's fine. Okay, well then, how motivated are you to actually achieve this thing that you think you're after? And so, yeah, I love aiming high. It's one of my favourites.
Okay, so we'll go through them all, but I want to ask the same sort of question for the next one, which is leadership.
Mm.
So do you mean everybody's got to be the prime minister, or what? Let's talk us through leadership. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so our definition for leadership is supporting, encouraging, and developing others to achieve a shared goal. And some of the earlier steps in this one are around acknowledging how you're feeling, recognizing other people's feelings, moving on to managing group discussions, recognizing
anything in there about yourself, leading yourself? Is there anything that you have on that? Because that's a bit of a hobby horse of mine. Is
yeah,
that
I think so. I think definitely in the higher steps, I reflect on my own leadership style
there we go.
and effect on others. And so these are just the blanket sort of titles for the steps, and then you're able to go into that step and understand. So if I go into step number 13, for example, the one that says I reflect on my own leadership style, and I click to go and build that skill, it then tells me, well, what are the building blocks to be able to do this? And some of the reflective questions are, what is my leadership style? You know, how does each style affect other people? Have you had experience of working on a project where you've had to use or change your leadership style? How did this affect you as a person? So we have lots of reflective questions under each one of the steps. But yeah, I think it couldn't be a robust leadership skill if there wasn't the opportunity to reflect on yourself, because that's all around us.
How I lead myself, it's like, okay. And the last one is teamwork. I think that's, I don't know if you want to say anything, but I think that's, yeah.
Again, it's all the things in teamwork. It's probably the one that you see the most on job descriptions. You need an excellent team player.
To be a team player.
But again, for me, it's like one of the flakiest in that. How do you articulate that? How does that person interviewing for that job know what they want to translate into what is a good team player? Because, something that I've learned in my career up until now is like the teamwork space is all about people. And so, if an employer was using the framework and was able to say, what we're looking for is an advanced step of, I improve the team by building relationships beyond my immediate team. Then imagine if someone had that as a starting point to say, we want to know how you do this. And an individual could come to the table and say, well, actually, yeah, I've done this loads of times and this is how I've done it. I just think it could be so powerful.
Cool. So the universal framework: listening, speaking, problem solving, creativity, staying positive, aiming high, leadership, and teamwork. There we have it. In 2 minutes, what you need to know, essentially, about the universal framework. So, conscious of a time before Annabelle says it, because that's normally her line.
Beaten me to it. There you go.
Ruby, that was just, thank you so much for your insights. I think you are a living universal framework, and you should congratulate yourself on your honesty. And I think anybody could take inspiration from one of your chapters, depending if you're Ruby chapter 1 or 6, or including you've ended up today in a job that you're getting meaning from, and that is actually almost a synthesis of some of the parts of your story. And surprisingly enough, lots of people, and whether they're in banking or consulting or SkillsBuilder, find that similar sort of meaning. It's to be found everywhere. And I'm certainly feel lucky enough to be in this ethos organization where we just feels like playing all the time. As it just feels right what we're doing. So final thoughts, all from me. Thank you for putting up with my questions and probing. Final thoughts, Annabelle?
I would just say that anyone that's listening to this podcast, anyone that's just thinking about, puts the SkillsBuilder framework to one side, anyone that's thinking about what does the next step look like for them in their sort of, social values within their organization, their corporate social responsibility, what it might be to deepen their impact with work experience. If they're doing great things and they're thinking, what's next, then I'd be very happy to have a conversation to explore what that might look like.
Wonderful. There's an offer we can't refuse.
Let's not cut that bit.
that'll make the cut. Annabelle, any final thoughts?
No, just thank you so much for coming along and joining us. I know there's a little reticence, initially,
No,
but I'm glad you
it's
got
been
over that
great.
hurdle.
Thank you for making it so easy and enjoyable, and I've really enjoyed the last hour
Lovely.
with you both.
Well, let's keep in touch. Thank you so much,
Yes, take
Ruby,
care. Bye for
Annabelle,
now.
and from
Bye
me,
bye.
Rob. Bye bye.